Well, it is officially the month of June, and although it is really starting to get hot outside, the bass fishing can also heat up in June. And today I want to talk about the top 5 lures that I do not leave home without. So stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. One of the best ways to help support this channel is by supporting the companies that support this channel. And Sportsman's Outfitters has been behind Bass Fishing HQ for a long time now. And all the lures that I'm going to talk about today, you can actually find them all at Sportsman's Outfitters, and you're probably going to find them for the best price that you will see anywhere on the internet. So if you guys want to help support this channel, click those links down below in the description. Now, before we actually get into the top 5 lures, I quickly want to explain what happens in the month of June. I think it will help you to understand my thought process behind all these different lures. Now, if you live in the south part of the country, the Texases, the Floridas, a lot of these fish are really pretty much in their summer patterns by June. They're pretty much off the bank. You're still gonna have some fish that are around bluegill beds that are still pretty shallow, but for the most part, those fish are deeper and in their offshore patterns. Now, if you live kind of in the middle part of the country, that central part of the country, a lot of these fish are just starting to get to that offshore kind of summer pattern that they will be in. So a lot of these fish are kind of fresh from shallow water. You still have a big group of fish that are still in shallow water, but a lot of these fish are just starting to make their way out to those offshore structure places. Now, if you live up in the northern part of the country, you might have a lot of fish that are still up on beds. I know that for me, I've fished up in Michigan and New York in June, and I've caught fish that are still on beds. But I've really tried to critique these 5 lures that no matter where you live in the country, you can still use them and catch bass. So let's go ahead and dive into the lures now. And the first one that I'm definitely going to have in the month of June, probably one of my favorites, is a spook, or a walking style topwater bait. This is a big player for me anytime I am fishing in the month of June. I have this rigged up not only in the month of June, but pretty much from here on out till pretty much November or December. I'm gonna have a spook on the front deck of my boat. This is just one of the best ways to not only go out there and catch a lot of fish and have a lot of fun, but it is a great way to catch some really big fish. I've caught some really big fish in the northern part of the country, like big smallmouth 5-6 pounders on spooks. I've also caught a lot of big fish in the southern part of the country with these baits. Now, there's a few big keys that I want to talk about when it comes to fishing a walking style topwater bait like this that I think are extremely important. I think that these 2 factors that I'm about to tell you are way more important than even the color of the bait, because when it comes to colors, I'm pretty much going to pick something that is bait fish oriented, you know, your whites or bone color, maybe a transparent color like this. That's what I'm going with for the most part. But these 2 factors I want to talk about, and the first one is noise or sound. I think sound plays a huge key into getting fish that are going to commit to a bait. And what I mean by sound is that some baits you pick up, like this is one of my favorite ones on the market. It's a Strike King Sexy Dog. This is kind of my go-to walking style topwater bait. This one has a lot of rattles in it. It makes a lot of noise. These type of baits can really call fish up from really deep in the water. Sometimes you may be fishing over a point or a brush pile that is sitting 10, 12 foot deep, and you can call fish out of that deep water to come up and hit your spook. And I think that sound plays a big key in that. Also, if the fish are just really active, maybe they're actively feeding, I also like a lot of sound because it really helps those active fish to hone in on exactly where this spook is. Now, on the flip side of things, this is my other favorite topwater bait. It's one that I kind of kept secret for a long time, pretty much until last year. And this is called the Evergreen JT. Now, if you listen to this bait, nothing. There's absolutely no rattles. There's nothing in this at all that makes noise. It's a completely silent bait. Now, what I have seen out there on the water, if you're fishing around a lot of guys that are fishing spook and walking style baits, I tend to go with the silent bait. They have seen a lot of these rattling baits, and the silent bait tends to outperform those rattling baits. Now, the other thing is, if you have fish that are constantly coming up and hitting that spook and missing the bait, maybe they're popping it into the air, or they're just rolling on it, or you're losing a lot of them, try that silent bait. Try the Evergreen JT, because for some reason, when they're busting this one in the air, they're missing it, they will eat this one. I think that that's really, really important. Now, the other huge factor, the second one I want to talk about with spooks, is the feather that is on the bottom. Most of the time when I fish a spook, I like to have a feather on the back, especially when I'm fishing around fish that are concentrated on really small bait fish. It seems like if they're concentrated on really small bait fish, they will hone in on that little feather and they will commit to it because of that little feather. Now, with that being said, I have also seen days out there on the water where taking the feather off of your bait will actually help the bass to commit to the lure, to like the body of this bait a little bit better. And this is something that just kind of comes with time, with just experimenting, with seeing a lot of fish. But what you'll see is a lot of fish are simply eating the feather, and they will be barely hooked on that feather of the bait, that last feathered treble hook like that. And when they are barely hooked, sometimes they pop off. And if I'm losing a lot of fish and I can tell that they're hooked on the back, I've seen days where I pop that feather hook off, I put just a regular treble hook on there, and they will start committing to the body of the bait and getting a lot more hooks, which means you start landing a lot more of those fish. So that's something that really comes with experimentation, both those two factors. Experiment a lot with sound, with your feather. You're gonna find that perfect combination that helps you to catch a lot of bass. Now, moving on to lure number 2, another really, really fun way to go out there and catch fish, but hey, I like every way that I can catch a fish, and that is fishing a jig head swim bait like you have right here. This is something that I have done a lot more here recently. I used to fish a lot of deep diving crankbaits, and we're actually going to talk about deep diving crankbaits here in just a minute. But I have kind of transitioned to fishing a lot more of a jig-headed swim bait like this in those same situations where I used to fish a deep diving crankbait. And I think the biggest reason for this is that when deep diving crankbaits really became popular, I mean, they've always been around. David Fritz used to use them a lot, but I feel like when Kevin Van Dam started winning, it seemed like every tournament on a deep diving crankbait, I feel like everybody and their brother started picking up a deep diving crankbait, and they work. They catch big fish. They still work, but I have found a lot more times nowadays, I tend to get more bites and catch quality fish using this swim bait in those exact same situations as the deep diving crankbait. It just has a lot more natural look to it, and the fish don't seem to get as conditioned to this bait. Sometimes if you're fishing maybe an offshore ledge or hump where there's a lot of fish and everybody that is fishing that area is throwing a deep diving crankbait, those are the areas you show them something more natural and you're gonna catch a lot more fish. The other thing that I like about a swim bait like this is you can fish it above the fish. With a deep diving crankbait, it's pretty much gonna dive down to its depth, and it's going to hit that depth, and it's gonna pretty much grind into the bottom, which can be really good when the bass are positioned right. But a lot of times you will see bass that are suspended a little bit off of the bottom. They might be a foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot off the bottom. And in those situations, instead of using that deep diving crankbait that actually tends to get below them, you wanna fish this swim bait above those fish for them fish to come up and get that bait. So that's a big reason why I fish these swim baits a lot. And you can kind of critique the swim bait to the fishing that you do. For example, if you live down south or in the middle part of the country, or even where I live where there's a lot of big gizzard shad, you might want to throw a bigger swim bait. This is just a bigger Keitech on a bigger head. I got this one with the weed guard in case you fish it around stumps or brush piles. Or if you fish up in the northern part of the country, or where there's just smaller bait fish, maybe in a pond or a lake that you fish, making a little bit smaller swim bait. I like this little easy swimmer right here by Keitech as well. It's a great little bait, and it's something that a lot of guys don't throw. A lot of guys like this ribbed, the fat style swim bait. This little easy swimmer is just something that's a little bit more subtle and not as many people throw it. So really pick out a swim bait that fits the body of water that you're fishing, and just fish this bait. You're gonna catch a lot of bass on it. Now, bait number 3, we kind of just talked about it, but not really, and that is a deep diving crankbait. I just hooked myself a little bit right there, but the deep diving crankbait still plays. And last year I was actually doing you know, a June fishing video. I talked about a swim bait there. I felt like I kind of bad-mouthed the deep diving crankbait, and I actually put it into the list this year because the big thing about deep diving crankbaits is that when you get on a deep diving crankbait bite, you are catching the biggest fish that live in your lake. This is why you see this technique win so many tournaments, is because when you are tournament fishing and you get on that bite, you catch big ones. You catch 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s. I mean, if you live down in Texas, guys are throwing really big, you know, like 10XD style baits, really big baits. Even up in the northern part of the country, I have fished on Lake Erie fishing a deep diving crankbait and catching really big smallmouth before. So the thing is, when you can get on this bite, it tends to outproduce any other lure. Now, the big thing with this bite is understanding that pressure really affects this deep diving crankbait bite more than anything. We've already kind of talked about this, but when you have a lot of pressure on a body of water, I feel like they really get turned off by these baits because they make a lot of commotion. They have a lot of sound to them. They have a lot of rattles. They're a very aggressive bait down there on the water. So when you have a lot of pressure, that's when it seems like the bass don't like them. But in the right situation, again, these baits cannot be beaten. And a lot of times the right situation comes down to current. If you have current in your body of water, a lot of times that is going to position bass. It's going to set up bass in specific areas. It's going to make them hold closer to the bottom at times. And that is when you can pick them apart with a deep diving crankbait. Now, current may be because you fish on a lake that generates current. You may fish a lake that's just really big and it has a lot of wind current going through it. But anytime I can fish around current, that is when I'm gonna pick up the deep diving crankbait. Now, moving on to lure number 4. This is one that we all know about. If you're a pond fisherman, if you're a tournament fisherman, we all fish this bait. It catches really big ones, and that is the Wacky Rig. The standard Gary Yamamoto 5-inch or 6-inch Cinco on a Wacky Rig is a deadly, deadly lure. Now, a lot of guys fish this during the spawn and they will catch a lot of fish on it. But even after the spawn, what happens in a lot of lakes is a bluegill spawn. Okay, during the months of June, July, August, pretty much during any full moon, you're going to have bluegills that move up shallow and make these little beds, and they will bed really close to each other. Now, a cover that is kind of close to these bluegill beds, maybe it's a lay down tree, maybe it's a grass patch, maybe it's a dock, any piece of cover that is close to these bluegill beds, that is typically where the bass will hold. They will ambush these bluegill, they will pick them off. And what I have seen is that if you are on a good bluegill bed bite, those fish tend to be bigger ones. They tend to be really, really big ones. And one of the best ways to pick those fish off is with the good old green pumpkin or watermelon Wacky Rig. It's a very simple way of fishing. We all know how to fish this bait. You basically cast it out, let it sink to the bottom, pop it up a few times, let it sink again. Most of the time, the fish are gonna get this on that initial fall, but it's a great bait. It's one that you will always find on the front deck of my boat in the month of June. Now, moving on to lure number 5. This is one of my absolute favorite techniques in the world, and that is fishing a big Texas rig worm. Right here I have a Zoom Magnum trick worm. I love a Zoom Old Monster. There's a lot of big worms out there on the market that are great baits to fish. This is one that I've done well with in a lot of big tournaments like the Bassmaster Opens before. And I actually did a full video all about big worm fishing in the summer. So if you guys want to watch that video, I'm going to link it right here. I think you will enjoy that one and you're going to learn a lot about the big worm. So comment below, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.